School is in. But are you really ready to learn? Open your eyes to a new day in education with The Awakening Educator, a program specifically designed to explore a new, mindful way of educating our youth. Learn about social-emotional learning, new modalities of teaching, and the most relevant topics in education with your hosts, Susan Andrian and Megan Sweet. Susan and Megan will take you inside the issues by looking at them from different points of view, from policies and research to teaching models that are actually used in schools. There's never a dull moment in this classroom. Have any questions you'd like to ask? Maybe you have knowledge you'd like to share, and share your thoughts live on air. Grab a pen and paper and get ready to open your textbooks and minds to a new way of learning on The Awakening Educator.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Awakening Educator. My name is Megan Sweet, and I am with the lovely
Susan Andrian. Super excited to be here today.
And today we're starting off with our next series on distance learning. So in this time of COVID, schools across the country have had to shift their way of instructing students, actually across the world, to distance learning or to learning outside, and make really quick, rapid adjustments around how we instruct our students. So we have a really great 3-part series on it, and we're starting today with policy. And we are lucky enough to have our Assemblymember from here, where we are in California, Assemblymember Rob Bonta, join us to talk about those policy implications. So welcome, Assemblymember Bonta.
Thank you,
Can you tell us a
Megan.
little bit about your background?
Yeah, totally. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Susan. Rob Bonta, California State Assembly member representing Oakland, Alameda, and San Leandro. It's the 18th Assembly District. I've served for 8 years. I've had that honor and privilege. I just got elected to my 5th term. And before that, I was the vice mayor of the city of Alameda. And before that, a healthcare district elected trustee. And but most importantly to me, the father of 3 amazing kids, 2 of whom are in the public school system right now. One's in college. And also the husband of Mia Bonta, who we've been together since 17. We were 17 years old. We met in an orientation program before college started, and she is the school board president here in Alameda, where the one and only Megan Sweet will be sworn in soon enough, and they'll be serving side by side to fight for our kids and our families and our district. So excited about that. I've focused on issues related to equity and justice and opportunity and inclusion, from addressing our climate crisis to criminal justice reform, expanding access to healthcare, addressing homelessness, combating human trafficking. The list goes on. I feel that there's so many issues that need to be addressing. Sometimes people say as a leader, you should focus on one thing and really own that space. That just hasn't been me. I think there's so many areas that need it. And certainly education. One of the reasons I ran for assembly when I was a city council member was because as a parent, I saw the underfunding of our schools and the critical role that the state had. I wanted to bring a parent's perspective, a father's perspective, a product of California's public schools perspective to that work. And I've been thankful for a lot of the things that we've accomplished, including local control funding formula, which I think was just a major change for the better in terms of using that equity lens for how we distribute our funds throughout the state of California, helping students and communities who need it most. But we're still not doing enough, and we're certainly, the failure of Prop 15 is a problem that would have helped us with more funding. There's 2 issues here. Of course, it's the amount of funding and then how you use it. But
Right.
we're not funding enough. We need to do more. And certainly now with all the challenges of COVID, we've had to significantly adjust how students learn and how we teach and how our education system operates. So, but thankful to be in a place in California where I think we lead as a nation, where the phrase has been coined, as California goes, so goes the nation. We're always hoping to do it best, to do it first, to be values-based, and that includes our education system. So thanks, Susan and Megan, for the opportunity to join you today.
And thanks
Thank
for
you,
highlighting Megan's win in Alameda Unified as a school board member. This is the first episode that we've recorded since that happened, and we're very excited.
Totally.
I just continue to get feedback that I've baffled everyone. So that's mostly what I'm sitting with. Is no one expected it, including me. So we're all making the adjustments, and I'm completely honored and thrilled to be doing it. So yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. Yeah. So when Susan and I were planning this show, Assemblymember Bonta, we were just it's such an interesting. For me, I've thought a lot about in education. Creating change in education is really hard. And I've been the biggest evangelist of it takes 5 to 10 years. System moves slowly. We've got to be patient. And then this year happened. And suddenly, actually, districts are turning on a dime. Classrooms are turning on a dime. Teachers, instructional strategies. And I've had to eat my words in a really joyful way in some ways, but also watching us as we stumble as we're turning that quickly. So we thought it'd be interesting to even just start with what do schools have to do now that we're in this kind of shelter in place, distance learning place? How have the regulations changed? And so what do they need to do just in general terms, but what do you think are the bigger impacts that they're needing to hold as they've made this shift?
Yeah, so I thank you for your point about rapid pivoting and adjusting. We've had to do that as a state, a nation, and a world, and certainly our schools are a big part of it. As COVID emerged as a threat to our collective public health, and created an economic recession, and forced us and required us to do things differently. It showed what I think is an important lesson, that when there's the will and the necessity, we can move quickly, even at scale of systems. And sometimes when you're forced to move quickly and you need to adjust rapidly, all the inputs and the processes that take time are not engaged in the same way. It allows for speedier action, but maybe mistakes along the way. And I think that's true here too. One example is, just people needed their stimulus checks. So we got them out as fast as we could to folks at the federal level. And there were some mistakes. People got stimulus checks who weren't supposed to get them. People who deserved them never got them, but we wanted to move quickly. And here we needed to move guided by safety. That's always been how California does it in the COVID-19 environment. And in the time of COVID, we want to move forward with facts. We want to move forward with science. We want to move forward with health. And education is always about to me, every policy area, health policy, homelessness policy, education policy, it's always about people. It's about our students, our families, our teachers, our communities. And if you don't have your health and safety protected, then you don't have anything. So we adjusted rapidly. We made sure that funding continued to our schools, and that learning continued, just not in a site-based way. We made sure that some of the offerings that our students and our vulnerable students and families rely on, like a healthy, nutritious meal, continue to be provided. That was really important. Again, that's the California's equity lens, seeing that schools aren't just where you learn from books, but it's where some of our students might get the only healthy meal of the day. And that was important. We wanted our teachers and our classified employees to know that they were going to continue to get paid. We weren't going to do massive layoffs. And then we needed to adjust to a new system, and that system is virtual. And for the most part, I think that's the safest. Certainly, as we have this toggling back and forth between opening and closing of certain components of our economy, and now we're seeing some of the highest spikes in the whole 8 months of the COVID. Safety is paramount, and public health is paramount. So, SB 98 was passed and signed in June, which basically required certain time commitments to learning, and some of the words that we were not familiar with, that we weren't familiar with at the time, that were introduced then for folks. You guys probably know it, but most others didn't, around asynchronous and synchronous learning. So we have synchronous learning and asynchronous learning. There's a good amount, and that means basically being taught live in the classroom, the virtual classroom, and then doing more independent study without your teacher and your peers. And there's requirements based on age for how much time you need to do the studying. And that's kind of an interesting requirement in itself. I think some people think that makes sense. But that's not the only way to think about what we should be doing. There could be metrics around, achievement and mastery. as opposed to the input of time and how much you learn. Or how much time you spend learning, as opposed to sort of the output and the outcomes of learning. I think every parent, when they send their kid to school, want them to have learned something, to have more knowledge and more achievement at the end of the year than at the beginning of the year. That's just, that's why you go to school. And so how we measure that, it could be another way of looking at this. But we've provided the support. The funding continues to flow. We've moved to virtual, and we have requirements around asynchronous and synchronous learning. But frankly, it's a little bit confusing. Even for me, like, what's the difference between asynchronous learning and homework? I don't think my son knows. And don't ask me that question, because I don't think I can give a nuanced answer. But we're all making it work. And what I like about it is that we do agree that, for the most part, I certainly believe that health and safety, public health is first, and we need to do the best we can in the environment that we have. And where we start might not be where we end. We need to assess as we go, improve, strengthen, acknowledge the failings, and be okay just owning them and saying we need to do better and we need to do this different. And because like I said, when you move, you pivot quickly, you're not going to nail it and get it right, on day one. It's a continuum and making progress over time.
There were so many points in that I wanted to
You're making me smile, Assemblymember Bonta, because I'm laughing at you. You asked the good question. I'm laughing at so Assemblymember Bonta and I, we have one of our sons are in the same class, and so I'm smiling because just yesterday my kid was like, oh well, we were checking on an essay that they have to do. And he's like, well, I'll do it on Friday afternoon. I'm like, well, why didn't you do it on Wednesday? And he was like, well, that's my day off. And I was like, no. Wednesday's not a free day, my friend. It's actually, it's the time you're supposed to be doing all the other work.
Day off.
I think even for kids, like that's the asynchronous time, kiddo. But he imagines it in his mind as a day off. So it's all very complicated. So anyways.
It is complicated, and bringing up the question around mastery and achievement versus like time, I think that conversation isn't happening enough. So I was really excited to hear you bring that into the conversation, and wondering, because I think we did pivot and everybody's just trying to make sense, and we're going to be talking with teachers today, depending on when it's this recorded, you'll hear this, but we're going to be having a panel about the challenges teachers have had. And I think that we are in the opportunity for reimagine. And my mantra through this whole 8 months has been, how are we going to emerge from this better than we came in? And we're going to learn from our mistakes, and we're going to learn from the ways in which we've done these creative and new ways of engaging kids. But on the policy level, and watching what we've been struggling with in Oakland around attendance, and when we talk about asynchronous and synchronous, and how we are measuring what is attendance, what's not attendance, what's engagement, what's not engagement, and wondering how on the policy level these conversations have happened, and how we're talking about those things differently, because attendance and engagement really are different. And when we're thinking about achievement and mastery, or synchronous or asynchronous, our heads start to spin. And on a policy level, how have those discussions been happening, and how are we growing to make sense of the laws that have come out of it around attendance?
We've been doing things very differently in the world of COVID. When you have a crisis like this, a lot of emergency powers move to the executive branch and the administration. So the role of the governor becomes very important. The role of the superintendent of public instruction and CDE, very critical. And when you're moving quickly, you don't move through the typical dance of legislation where you're having hearings in committees, and you're getting into nuance and drilling down into the specifics. So a lot of it, frankly, has been happening by executive order and by bills that allow us to move quickly, that have been introduced, and the details of which by sort of determined by some of our policy chairs, what I would call the big three, like the pro tem, the speaker, and the governor. We've had a harder time in how we do our process. We went virtual for a while. We weren't in session as long because of how we meet and how we gather is in a congregate setting. We were able to forced to move many fewer bills. So some of these discussions, they've happened in smaller spaces, not fully vetted, not with all the public input that we'd like. And so my hope, my wish is that we have a continuous feedback loop on what we're doing and getting affirmation on what's working and constructive criticism and suggestions on what's not, so we can improve it. So that's not something that we do necessarily super well as multi governments talking to each other and moving in sync. There's certain places where those voices are uplifted. The School Board Association might be one, the Teachers Association, for the interests of their members. We're starting a new session, and bills will start moving, but we're starting to move out of. Hopefully, maybe I'm being more hopeful and optimistic than I should be, but I'm always hopeful and optimistic about our people and our state and where we're headed. With vaccines on the horizon and mass distribution still taking some time, maybe we'll be moving out of COVID sooner than later. So the only reason I say that is because legislation generally gets passed and signed and it becomes effective on January of the following year. So the legislation we're going to get signed unless it has an urgency clause or unless it also is backed by an executive order that has immediate implementation date, won't occur till 2021. So January 2022. We're about to hit 2021. So some of these discussions, they're happening with our policy chair, Patrick O'Donnell, and the Education Committee, his colleague in the Senate at the Speaker and pro tem level. But anytime someone like me, a fellow member, is championing an issue or wants to raise an issue, we can and we do. And so hearing from folks on the ground, hearing from school board members like Member Sweet, or school board presidents like President Bonta, who actually is anything that you like that I say on this call came from her, including the issue about achievement. She's been talking about that. We are always fighting for the best Zoom space for our meeting. She always wins, but the benefit of that is I get to hear her calls and hear her thinking and hear what she's talking about with respect to what our kids are facing, challenges they're enduring, and the paths forward. So that was a long politician's answer to a more specific question. But
I think it was really helpful. And even just thinking about, all right, so now we're going to start to work on legislation that's going to come into play in a year from now, is a great opportunity to reflect back on what have we learned during this time that may shift how we do things when we are able to come, because we've learned a lot. And so how do you as an assembly member and the team and our politicians who we put in there to represent us, how do those things get incorporated into new laws so that we can do things better when rather than just go back?
Totally. No, and I love that point that you're making. And I have two areas I want to sort of highlight around that. First, the idea that we don't want to go back to quote unquote normal, right? We want to be better, stronger. A lot of inequities have been exacerbated, highlighted, laid bare. We want to be able to address those as we go forward. So there's sort of a durability in some of our solutions. We want to put into play long-term solutions to the challenges that we've seen here, and with enduring policy. So that's item number one. And item number two is, how do you identify the content of what that is? One of my roles is one of the most important roles, and I think one of the most underrated skills in leadership, is just to listen, and to hear from folks who are doing this work, who are on the ground seeing the challenges. So a lot of times I am a vessel for solutions. People talk to me, I listen, I agree, I champion it, and I kind of take it from there, because my job is to know the legislative process, how to turn proposed solutions into enduring ones that are in our law, in our statutes, and to partner with folks on the ground. So that the input of of Trustee Sweet on the school board, of President Bonta, of my other school board leaders in Oakland, of our superintendents, of our teachers, of our parents, of anybody. I mean, as Megan knows, I've been doing these town halls with stakeholders, school board presidents, union leaders, superintendents, to hear what the challenges are, and to be in tune with what's happening, so that I can play that role that you're highlighting, Susan, of bringing those enduring solutions forward for consideration by my colleagues, so that they can be put into the law, so we can be better after this crisis, and during it. We can improve, and we should improve during it as well, so that we can just be better, and we can be stronger.
Yeah, I appreciate so much of what you've been talking about, Assemblymember Bonta, especially. Yeah, I mean, I think what you said that made me smile the most just now was that actually I as a longtime educator, don't have a lot of interest in going back to what we've had before. I mean, there's plenty that have worked before for some people, but my interest is trying to figure out ways to infuse some of the creativity and the flexibility that we've been forced to have, and some of these key shifts that we've been imagining, to actually imagine education in a new way moving forward that's going to be more empowering for students, because a lot of students weren't really served by our education system before, and those students are the ones that for the most part are also struggling the most in this moment, right? So they're the ones that are our low-income students or students of color, are struggling to be supported in this time. If you're in a home where you don't have technology or access to food, as you named, like a couple of things have come out that I've been really excited about. One is just the role that schools play that go beyond instruction. I think those have been highlighted in a new way. The role that social emotional learning or awareness or community plays in a school, that I think if you've been an educator around educators, as you've been, we've all known that, but like the felt sense of that loss. But then also, how do we instruct in a different way to support students so that actually everybody does come out of this stronger? So those were all really exciting points that you named for me. And I guess I'm wondering, as you've heard from these different school districts, speaking of groups that are maybe struggling, what are the groups of students that you're most concerned with as we move out of this into the next phase where we need to start to do some additional support? Who have you been hearing about that we need to support additionally?
A number of different groups, but certainly our most vulnerable community members as a general bucket. But our poorer students who don't have access to the tools for virtual learning, and I know that we know that needs to be addressed, and that we're working on it. But there's folks who are in home environments that aren't the most conducive for learning. Sometimes school can be, is a safer, better place for some students. It might not be as supportive or nurturing in the way that's needed. It might not be a place where they can be their best selves to learn. It might not be a place where they can get some of the basics like a healthy meal. So I worry about our most vulnerable kids always. That's my first and foremost consideration in everything that we do, and providing some sort of floor of support for every student, so that they have the basics that are necessary to be ready and able to learn. Special education students, definitely a category where I worry and I'm concerned if they're getting the care and focus and attention that they need in the way that they need it. Folks with IEPs, if those are being implemented in a way that's, with accommodations and support as necessary. So it's quite a few. And then for all of our kids, their emotional state, their mental health, isolation, it works for some not at all. And my son is, I've joked that he's the model of sheltering in place. He can resist leaving the house for days, and he can talk to his friends while gaming on his headset, and And he's always super sweet and happy and gets his work done. He's a rule follower. He'll get his work done by the deadline. And then my other daughter, totally different. Like, she gains energy and happiness off of people, off of being with one another. So this has been really hard for her. And it's part of each of our personalities and who we are and what we get strength and energy and happiness from. But there's a lot of students that are struggling with mental health, as we know, and a lot before COVID were struggling, and so this just really exacerbates it and it worse. So that's kind of some of my thoughts on our students, but our staff too. Our teachers, our teachers love the kids. They love being around kids. That makes them happy. They're pained that they have to do this over a screen and can't be in a room, learning, teaching them and seeing their learning and their happiness. So I know our teachers are our educators are having a hard time, and we're just having to do this in a different way. And I know that many of them, based on these town halls that I've had, I've said it directly. They're worried about going back into a site-based environment and what that might mean. Certainly, if they have underlying conditions or they're in the age group of vulnerability, that's a concern. So there's a lot of anxiety going around, for everybody. And what I've appreciated most in some of my town halls, where I've gotten to listen and hear from the different leaders and stakeholders in our schools and our school districts, is that there appears to be a really strong spirit of collaboration, of kind of folks saying, we're all in this together. We don't have all the answers, but we're going to make it through. We're going to figure it out together. And as long as we stick together, we'll make mistakes, and that's okay. And we'll try to fix those mistakes. And we'll support each other. We won't point the finger. We'll have each other's backs, and we'll make this work. Like, that spirit has been super inspiring for me and makes me very hopeful for what we can do. But I also know there's a lot of pain and struggle. I worry about parents who I usually, my kids are in school for 6 hours a day. I even have them in aftercare, so it's longer, and that's when I work. And that's where I get my job done. So the work-life balance is really hard. And Mia and I have been dealing with that. We've always been a dual working household. We had our kids in elementary school and then went to Girls Inc. afterwards. So from 8 to 6, we could focus on work and on Wednesdays, as your son says, Megan, that his day off, the check-in day, it's like, you're done at 9 or, so I still have 8 hours of work ahead of me, or, 10 or 12 or whatever it is. And how do we make this work? So there's so many challenges that exist that I worry about, that we need to acknowledge. I think acknowledging the problem is the first step in fixing the problem. But knowing that there's just so many challenges going around, but that people have good intentions, have good hearts, they want to make it work, gives me hope.
That's a good place to stop. We actually have to, we're already at time, Susan. So
I know. I just wanted to ask I wanted to ask one more question, just on an ending, because I agree in the collaboration. The one thing that and quickly, is of this, what are some of the pieces that are more positive that you think may influence the next? Because I spend a lot of time thinking about the most vulnerable kids and the needs, but I've also really seen some things that have worked for kids that weren't working before. Like, there's The Atlantic just put out a study that said adolescents are overall doing better because they're sleeping more and spending more time with their family. Like, I'm wondering what pieces of that may be influencing the things that have worked that may influence the next phase of things, just as an end on a positive.
Yeah, I think about that a lot. The issue of rest and sleep and being home. You may know there was a bill that was pretty controversial around school start times that really spoke to me as someone who, remembering my high school years, I just remember being tired all the time. And, I had this class that I took that was, it was only for like 5 students in the district. And it started at 7 a.m. and we had to drive there. And I was like, this is horrible. But like, I think the silver linings and the ability to be cognizant and to recognize these learnings and to be able to put them into systems going forward is what gives me definitely some hope. Like, if students are getting more rest, if they're getting more nurturing when they're around their families, I enjoy the family time. This is the most I've ever been around. Like, I'm the snack captain. Like, my kids are like, Dad, I'm in a break, I need a snack. And so I love being a dad. I shop for their snacks and make their snacks, but I like that engagement. Or they just pop out and they're like, I have this question about my homework, or I'm putting together something. So maybe there is more parental engagement with the students learning, and that could be a good thing. The rest, I think, is really an interesting component. But I think for me, it's the resilience is what makes me hopeful. Our ability to adapt. I've never doubted that we would persevere and make it through this time. And maybe this isn't happening everywhere, but I'm seeing a lot from our governor, and the discussions that we have in Alameda with my colleagues, is that people are being very intentional about the equity lens and not making it like a separate thing you think about as independently or as a separate bucket, but seeing that it's ingrained in every single thing that we do, and it's how we need to see everything. It's not like you talk about learning and then you talk about equity. You talk about equity and learning, at the same time, in the same conversation, with the same breath, every time you talk about it, because it's everywhere. I think that there could be a challenge around carrying forward what I'm hearing from you. Both is your vision of how we emerge, that we emerge stronger, we emerge with learnings, and that we take those learnings and we systematize them and build them into how we do things better. Whether that happens and how much it happens is another story. If I think, like most anything, if we're not intentional about it and focused on it and create a process around it, it might not happen. I've been in a lot of places where people have talked about good things, but then the follow-up and the implementation and the carry forward doesn't always occur. One, you asked about what I'm hopeful about, Susan, and this is just one example, but something like Oakland, I think it's called Oakland Undivided, like basically, a private, public, multi government approach to solving a problem, and people saying, here's the problem, we need to solve it, we need to get digital access to every student in Oakland so they can learn. And then the response that you get from people who are donating, giving, saying, I want to help, I'm raising my hand, I support that, let's do it, we care about our community, we know that some are doing better than others, and we want to help those who are facing the most struggle, who are the most vulnerable. Like, that spirit in so many places, that's just one example, but I think it captures it, is what makes me hopeful. People willing to pitch in, identify the challenges that we face, saying, as the governor says, if you have if there's a hole on your side of our boat, we need to plug it so we can all succeed together. And that kind of belief that we're going to rise together or not at all, we're all in this together, we're going to fight for one another, have each other's backs. I've seen that time and time again, and it's what I know us to be as a people. It's what I expect, but seeing it roll out in real time in so many ways is certainly inspiring and makes me hopeful.
Thank you, Assemblymember Bonta, for that, for your time today. We know that you're a very busy man, and so taking the time to talk with us, we're really appreciative of it. And that's such a wonderful image to end with, which is that we're all in this together, and that we are resilient and creative as a people. And when we continue to put the needs of students and families at the center of that, it is amazing what we can accomplish. And so I'm really excited and hopeful for what's to come. Super grateful for your support for us in the state of California and for your time today.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate the conversation.
Pleasure's mine. Thank you, Megan. Thank you, Susan. Thanks for uplifting all these super important issues for all of us as we move forward and what are challenging times. I think it's important to be able to put, be intentional about our discussions, our solutions, the challenges that we face, and you both are doing that on so many issues in so many ways. So I appreciate you and the time we had today.
Thanks so much.
That's it.
So Susan, we just had Assemblymember Bonta on, which was such an honor to have somebody who is so busy take their time to talk with us, and we thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit after he left about some of the policy issues that came up and how those might also extend beyond California. So he's a California assemblyman. He described a few things that are very California specific for us, like Prop 15. So I thought I'd just explain what that is.
Yeah.
So California is 38th in the nation in per pupil spending, which means that we are amongst the bottom around how much money we spend on our kids. And we had a bill that was going forward this year that would try and bring more money in. It's called Proposition 15, and it lost. So the bummer part about that is that we're going to continue to be 38th of 50, possibly.
And we've been wanting to do a show on finance for a while, and we're still hoping that's coming up soon. But this issue is so relevant to that, right? All of these things that we've talked about around how we pivot and what resources schools had at their to be able to even address the issue of moving to distance learning and supporting this effort. And he also talked about Oakland Undivided, which was a great partnership that brought Chromebooks and hotspots to every student in Oakland that needed one. And they were given to them to own. So these were not district, it was a partnership between the district and Oakland Undivided, and we were given a big donation from Twitter where students were given hotspots and Chromebooks so that they could access online learning. To keep.
Yeah, that's huge. Yeah, it's one of the images that's burned in my mind almost every day is, and I don't know where it was from somewhere in the country. The image of two girls that were sitting outside of a Taco Bell trying to do their homework, sitting on the curb, trying to get the free Wi-Fi. And, that's one of those things that we don't appreciate. In fact, my son definitely does not appreciate, which is he doesn't like that our Wi-Fi is slower than he'd like it to be. But the fact that he has Wi-Fi and he's able to do his learning and he has a safe and comfortable place to learn is a big deal during this time. And so, I appreciated Assemblymember Bonta naming that, and also naming access to food, which is always heartening for me when our leaders understand that food insecurity is such a big deal for so many of our families, and that schools have been playing a vital role in addressing that. It reminds me of our conversation with former State Superintendent Delane Easton, who helped to bring legislation in California to bring meals to our students in a more progressive way. And I've been watching, actually, our other guest, Jennifer Labar, has just secured a grant this morning to deliver meals as well. So it was been exciting.
When we first went to shelter in place, our highest viewed episode was the interview with Jennifer Labar, because we reposted it to kind of highlight the challenges around food, and there was it became clear how important during distance learning food was to our families, and it continues to be, and it has been one of the ways that community where it has shown up, and folks have still been able to stay connected to the school even during shelter in place. But I think we need to do more on. I think this is an opportunity to, as Assemblymember Bonta said, we're highlighting those equity issues, and we have an opportunity now that they're highlighted to make sure that the thread of those needs don't fade to the back as we get back in the building and people no longer see them in the same way.
Yeah, I really appreciated that he ended on that note, and it is something really hopeful for me, and I know for you too, which is I think that the confluence of COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter and unfortunately, devastatingly, the deaths / murders of several African American people this year have raised awareness around equity and bias in a way that people understand it being an issue in a bigger way than I've seen or heard of in a long time, or ever maybe. And it's become this thing that's not like a nice add-on or something we don't want to think about, but it's understood as a crucial element that we must address, not only just like financial inequities of families that don't have access to food or technology, but also the role of implicit bias and of the disproportional amount of African American students, especially boys, in special education and discipline issues, the achievement gap. These are all things we've known for a long time, but I feel like people are trying to understand them and understand the root causes in a different way, which makes me really hopeful. It certainly was ubiquitous in our in the school board race that I was just in. Like, it was in every conversation. There wasn't one person that was questioning that. It was an understood issue that we in the city need to address. And that was, that's why I entered the race. So it was very hopeful for me that was such a big part of the conversation, and it's going to be, what I focus on. When I'm sworn in 2 weeks.
I know. I'm so glad that voice will be, and not only will the voice be there, you have a depth of understanding of how education works, having been in the classroom, having been in the central, I think being able to bring both that equity lens and that real life experience to a board has the opportunity to make changes on a policy level that are realistic and will implement practice in the classroom in a way that can feel change and powerful, because I think sometimes that's what we miss. We have people that really understand the need, see the need, but don't understand the reality of what a teacher's experiencing day to day in the classroom, and to be able to have both of those things. I think that I'm hoping we get to a place as a culture that we start to understand the complexities, and I feel like we became so polarized and water things down so much, these simplistic responses. And in some ways, COVID forced us to make quick decisions, which was good. And I think Assemblymember Bonta brought that up, and I really appreciated the moving quick, but now we have the opportunity to sort of untangle. And I'm hoping as a culture we get to places where we can grapple with complexity.
Yeah, I agree. That's a great place to end, Susan. So let's end it there. We need to start grappling with complexity in a new way. It's exciting to hear a legislator talking about it in this way, and also, short-term versus long-term solution. Coming up in this series, we'll be talking to some teachers. We have a panel of teachers that will be joining us to talk about how they're working with distance learning, how they're making it work, how they're struggling with it. I imagine we'll hit all of those kinds of topics. And it'll be our first panel, so I'm kind of excited about that. I'm a little nervous, but I think it'll be good. And then we're going to hopefully have an administrator.
Yeah.
It'll be good.
I'm excited. I mean, it's so relevant, right? We're in it, but I hopefully will be able to also keep that thread of it isn't just the moment, it's the moving forward. So that's the thread.
I love that. I'm going to quote that. It's not just the moment, it's the moving forward, said by Susan Andrian. Thanks, everyone.
Class is dismissed. Wasn't that fun? Susan and Megan are always happy to greet you on the next episode of The Awakening Educator. Connect with us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube. Education is the foundation for a brighter future. Open your eyes to The Awakening Educator